The United States is experiencing a crisis of early death, says one study. Simply put, Americans are dying earlier, and it's unique to the United States. Today, I'm going to tell you why, and I'm going to tell you how you can use the world as your oyster to live longer and live healthier. This isn't happening in other developing countries. We've talked for years about how healthcare in the United States isn't what it's cracked up to be. We just hosted Nomad Capitalist Live in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I took our team, and a lot of our guests went to Prince Court Hospital and got amazing medical checkups for a tiny fraction of the price they pay in the United States. It almost made a lot of people wonder, what are we paying all these taxes for in the U.S.? What are we paying so much in fees for in the U.S. to get healthcare where we get a lot less personal attention than we get in a country like Malaysia? That's what I want you to understand, is that people are living longer in countries not only like Japan and South Korea, but even emerging countries, the UAE, and even parts of Eastern Europe. People are living longer than Americans are. That's due to food quality, it's due to healthcare quality, and I'm going to share with you a study that says why perhaps you want to reconsider, even if you want to keep living in the United States, getting some of your healthcare somewhere else. A recent study is revealing the dire state of public health in the United States in comparison to other wealthy nations. The U.S. death rate far outpaces America's peers, say leading researchers who says the country is experiencing a crisis of early death. So this is not an issue of, oh, those poor countries over there, which actually have in many cases great hospitals if you're willing to pay out of pocket a fraction of what you pay in the U.S. This is the other countries that are like the U.S. that Americans say, oh, we don't want to be like them, that every politician says we don't want to be like the rest of the world. They're all living longer. Researchers from the Boston University School of Public Health found that more than 1 million U.S. deaths per year, including many young and working-age adults, could be avoided if the country had mortality rates similar to other high-income nations. 1 million, that's like a small country. In 2021, 1.1 million deaths would have been averted if the U.S. had mortality rates similar to those wealthy nations. They're calling these excess deaths what they call missing Americans because the deaths reflect people who would still be alive if the U.S. death rate was equal to other countries. We've told you in recent years, we've shown you the graphs, the life expectancy in the U.S. has not only flatlined, but dipped. And that you can say that's COVID, you can say it's anything else, but other countries had a brief halt during COVID, but otherwise have been going up for a long time. The U.S. has really plateaued, and you're living close to a decade less in the U.S. than you would in, let's say, certain Asian countries, for example. And they're saying now, even working-age people are dying. Now, we've talked to a lot of Americans who come and join us overseas. They go to places in Europe, even Eastern Europe, where it's much more a farm-to-table kind of vibe in many places. And they say, tomato actually tastes like a tomato. I can't even believe it. This beef is like real beef, like food is actually of quality. In many other countries. People aren't obese everywhere. Just the culture, the food quality is different. People are living healthier lives. But the healthcare is also better. Obviously, some people in the United States can't afford healthcare. We've talked before, but there are certain parts of Texas, for example, where the infant mortality rate is on par with countries like Syria and Sudan. So there's a lot of problems in the U.S. healthcare system. But what this study is saying is, even if you're working age, even if you have the resources, 1.1 million people are still dying in the U.S. The study from the Boston University says it's unprecedented in modern times what's happening. Nearly 50% of all missing Americans died before age 65 in 2020 and 2021. The study found that the level of excess mortality among working-age adults is particularly stark. Think of people you know who have passed away before 65. Statistically, half of them would still be alive if the mortality rate met their peers. Now, the pandemic, it says, contributed to a sharp spike in mortality, more so than in other countries, but the new findings show that the number of excess U.S. deaths have been accelerating over the last 4 decades. We'd previously been saying sometime after the turn of the century, things started to plateau. Other countries kept growing their life expectancy. The U.S. did not. Just like the U.S. has been surpassed by post-communist countries in economic freedom, freedom of speech, things like that, they're now being surpassed by truly some emerging countries in terms of life expectancy. But this Boston University study says, no. It wasn't after the turn of the century. It's been 4 decades, longer than I've been alive. They analyzed trends in U.S. deaths from 1933 to 2021, including the impact of COVID-19, and then compared those with age-specific mortality rates in Canada, Japan, Australia, and 18 European nations. Now, back when I was born, the U.S. was the best place in the world to be born, according to The Economist, I believe, put that report out. West Germany, I think, was number 2, so that shows you how much the world has changed. And a lot of those countries that would have been at the bottom of that list back then are now serious contenders for places that you might want to move. How many people in 1984 wanted to move to Mexico, wanted to move to Dubai, wanted to move to Malaysia, wanted to move to Thailand, wanted to move to Panama, wanted to move to any of the countries that we talk about? People say, oh, Andrew only wants to go to those countries because they're cheaper or because there's some tax benefits. But quite frankly, I'll tell you, not only do you feel a sense of greater, what I call soft freedom, you just get left alone in those countries. People are often nicer. People aren't at each other's throats. The weather's better compared to many places. But I also truly believe the places that I live, I'll put Prince Court Medical Center in Malaysia. I'll put Bumrungrad in Thailand. I'll put anywhere in Singapore up against hospitals that I've been to in the U.S. any day of the week. And it's just a more pleasant experience. I'm happy to go and get a checkup because the doctor actually talks to me. Doctors trained in the U.K., they answer any questions you have. And I've talked to my father. I talked to other people who attended our event. In the U.S., you feel like you're getting the bum's rush. But when people who came to our event they live in Mexico, they live in Panama, they live in Thailand, they live all over the world, they said, you know, coming from the U.S., you actually get a lot more care. In some of these countries, the doctor comes to your home. In many of their cases, they said the doctor gave me his personal cell phone number. Call me if you have any questions. You're not getting that quality of care. So even though the countries that we talk about are often cheap, and some of them, like Ireland, aren't any cheaper, you're going to get a better quality of care. And you're realizing the care you're getting in the U.S. isn't even what you expected it to be. This is not that I hate the U.S. This is the U.S. is overrated according to what it's delivering. Overrated doesn't mean it's terrible, although tying Syria in some metrics, probably not something to brag about. Talking to my father, how do you live? How do you survive in Mexico? The healthcare must be in shambles. He said, it's better. I get better quality care. I get more attention from the doctor. I'm just here to tell you, the bubble has been burst. We have to live in reality. And if you're living in the U.S., you're going to take years off your life versus what you could probably live in some other country where the taxes are lower, where the freedom is higher, where they leave you alone. The U.S. had here's the study, had lower mortality rates than its peers during World War II and its aftermath. During the 60s and 70s, the U.S. had mortality rates similar to other wealthy nations, but the number of missing Americans began to increase year by year in the 1980s, reaching 622,000 and change in excess deaths by 2019. That spiked over 1 million in 2020, close to 1.1 during the pandemic. And so 13.1 million total missing Americans. The researchers emphasize this is multiracial, not specific to minorities, and they go on and on and on. What are the reasons for this? I really believe if you look at some of the causes of death, it's medical error. I'll tell you what, when you go to other countries, it is a different experience getting health care than in the U.S., where, you know, when I lost a bunch of weight 10 years ago and went to the hospital, I was a little worried. The guy's like, listen, we tested you, you're fine, go have a hamburger. You know, sometimes this kind of pragmatic advice is perhaps the best. You don't have to treat everything like it's a catastrophe. All right, a normal guy was like 29 at the time. You're fine. You haven't been eating enough. So I just think better quality healthcare, more attentive, more in touch with reality at a much lower cost. The food quality in the U.S., of course, has long been an issue. Just the general culture, the sedentary culture. To me, there's something that you will live more intentionally if you live somewhere else. Most of the places that I go, I don't have a car. People will see me. I walk around. If I can go anywhere that's a 10, 15, 20-minute walk, I walk. When I would do that in the United States and I would go out for a midnight walk, people would roll down their windows and hurl insults at me, like, oh, you don't have a car, you loser, because I just want to go for a walk. And you start to get into the car culture. And when you go somewhere else, you focus on, do I want a car? Do I need a car here? Now, if I lived in one place all the time, the likelihood for having a car would be higher. And so you might move overseas and have a car. But I think getting out of your own country, no matter what country that is going to cause you to start living intentionally. That might mean you walk more. It might mean you make different food choices. Certainly the food, again, in other countries, you're going to be hard-pressed to find worse food than you will in the U.S. And you're going to start seeking out the best quality care. So what we talk about at Nomad Capitalist is, if you want to live in your country, that's fine. Realize the risks. Realize it's not what it's cracked up to be. One thing you can start doing is, let's say you're a guest of our event. Come to Malaysia, go to Prince Court, go to whatever medical tourism hospital you want, get a checkup, maybe even plan for a surgery. Do your research, figure out how you can save money and perhaps get better quality care. And you might say, why don't I just move to a place where I have the things that I want? We talk about some very up-and-coming places that a young person might want to go and run a business. Cambodia, for example. I don't live in Cambodia. I wouldn't live in Cambodia. But if you're 18 years old and you want to go make a name for yourself, that's the kind of place you might want to go and start some kind of business where it's a lot easier. The quality of care in Cambodia is not going to be as good as the quality of care in Malaysia. In the last 10 years, it's gotten better. I feel more comfortable when I go there. But you're not moving to Cambodia for top quality care. Yet we have to stop this thing that if you leave the U.S., you are going to Cambodia, or you're going to Russia or to Iran. You could probably still do relatively well there. But if I'm 75, I'm not going to Cambodia. Realize that if you're 75 in the U.S., statistically, you only have a couple more years to live. And so I'm going to use this study as an example of how do I improve my life in these areas of food quality, care, and while I'm at it, getting more freedom, getting lower taxes. Because isn't it interesting that the countries you never would have thought you would have gotten care in 20, 30, and 40 years ago when this problem started are now some of the leaders in this? That's the fundamental thinking that has to shift.